Yes, it's Wisconsin. It's cold. I have accepted that long ago.
Well, this list has been due for a while. After all, with over 100 different weapons throughout the classic Mega Man series, there are bound to be those few that rise to the top like the cream on top of a root beer float. But I already covered those last year. So now it's time for me to talk about the dross at the bottom of the glass. Because let's face it, for every kick-ass weapon that Mega Man copies from the robots he reduces to wreckage, there's bound to be at least one that absolutely sucks. Whether it's situational, an energy hog, awkward to use, or just flat out weak, these are the kinds of weapons that I save for the likes of bosses and pretty much nothing else. Again, I'm limiting this to one weapon per game, and there were a few close calls, as there are some weapons that are functionally similar. Those will come up as needed. Anyways, enough jibber jabber. It's game time! One of the things that I've brought up about the first 4 games that Mega Man had on Game Boy was that each one had a unique robot boss to take down before you storm Wily's fortress. On the one hand, it adds a bit of originality to what would otherwise be Mega Man Remix Game Boy Edition, especially when 3 out of the 4 are actually pretty cool and fun to fight. On the other hand, it means that no matter what order you fight the Robot Masters in, there's one weapon you'll only be able to use in that final stage. It also doesn't help that these weapons are very hit or miss, and one of them actually has to be hit in order to do anything. Mirror Buster on the wall? You may as well stay there. This is the first example of a situational weapon on this list. While you're holding the button, this force field just hangs out in front of you. That is, until a projectile hits it and sends a counter projectile right back. Sounds cool, except that that's the only way it actually does anything, meaning it only works against enemies that shoot. If they rely on contact damage, you gotta use something else. And you gotta make sure you hold onto enough weapon energy to beat Wily. Hell, they made it even worse in Mega Man 10 by only reflecting forward. If you're gonna bring back a weapon, at least refrain from nerfing it.
Maybe the designers of this weapon should reflect on what they did and come up with a better version of it. Time for an obligatory JoJo reference. When Dio Brando returned as Part 3's villain, his stand, the world, gave him the power to stop time. Now imagine that power in your hands, as a Mega Man weapon. Except it's a one-time use weapon that's situational at best.
That is bullshit blazing, still my heart is blazing. If the word kill me, I don't need a new word on it.
Flashman's Time Stopper sounds like an awesome weapon in concept. Hit the fire button and... and then everything's frozen for a while, right? Yeah, in concept being the operative term. First off, you can typically only use it once without refilling it, and it remains active while the weapon energy gradually drains. The only exceptions are when Mega Man dies, or when Quickman, who's the only boss this weapon affects, is defeated. Also, while the Time Stopper is active, you can't shoot, and enemies don't have their hurt boxes removed, meaning you can't just turn it on and harmlessly walk by every enemy. Of course, you should be careful enough to avoid enemies in the first place, but that doesn't change the fact. Now you might say, no big deal, I'll just switch to a weapon I can use. Yeah, great idea! Wish they'd thought of that when they first made the game. Unfortunately, when time is stopped, you're stuck with that weapon. The only times this weapon really shines is in the case of environmental obstacles like those big yellow death beams of death, or the aforementioned Quickman. At least Mega Man 4's Flash Stopper fixed part of the issue by actually letting you shoot. Got any more bright ideas? Mega Man 8 is kinda weird when it comes to handling its weapons. Considering all the upgrades you can give your Buster, from powering up your charge to changing its form completely, it takes more emphasis than usual off of the special weapons. So to compensate, most of them do stuff that your Buster can't. Emphasis on most. I've brought up before how dumb Mega Man 8's Aquaman is. Dumb appearance, annoying water mechanics, a fight that could also get annoying. Yeah, there's a bit of a pattern here. So if you're expecting a weapon that's actually cool from this guy, well, maybe I should talk to you about the definition of insanity.
His weapon is a goddamn water balloon.
Yup, that's all you get. A short-range water balloon. It just fires a low arc and does low damage. Sure, it has a lot of energy and you can have as many on the screen at a time as they can last, but that doesn't change the fact that it's a freaking water balloon! And it doesn't even have a secondary use. Every other weapon in the game either has a purpose outside of simply being a weapon, or works in a way that your Buster doesn't. Tornado Hold and Mega Ball can get you to higher platforms. Flash Bomb and Astro Crush can destroy breakable surfaces. Thunderclaw lets you be Tarzan. But this? Just weak sauce DPS and low range all wrapped up in a membrane of idiocy. You're better off just using your Buster against enemies and the other weapons for other situations. Leave the child's toys for the pool party. On the whole, Mega Man 5's weapon selection was incredibly lackluster. We had a weapon that was just a weaponization of one of your standard moves, 2 ground-bound weapons, a weak-ass shield that managed to avoid this list because there were worse shields, and then you have Stone Man's Power Stone. What it is a group of 3 rocks that circles around you and spreads out to attack enemies. There are a couple fundamental problems with this weapon, however. First off, the rate at which the stones spread outward leaves a lot of potential gaps for an enemy to slip through, or for the weapon to just flat out miss. It's easy to use against big enemies, sure, but when you have small enemies on screen, you have to be pretty darn sure of the trajectory, which leads to another problem. The stones always rotate counterclockwise regardless of which direction you're facing. Wouldn't it make more sense and make it easier to use if it were the other way depending on your direction? It's like if your Buster only fired to the right even if you face left. What were they thinking on this? It gets even worse in the Game Boy game since the stones move at a snail's pace. In fact, it's so bad that they gave the name to an entirely different weapon in Power Fighters. You're better off using your Buster than using this awkward piece of crap, and given the rest of the weapons in 5, I really do mean your Buster. In the past, I've talked about the original Mega Man and its first game syndrome. The funny thing about that is that some of their worst weapons got better in other games. That actually helped decide one of my tiebreakers, but that's later on. Another example is in the Chibi remake of the original, Mega Man Powered Up. The Hyper Bomb sucked in the original, mostly due to the fact that it didn't explode on contact with an enemy. Powered Up actually fixed that flaw, making it much more viable. Unfortunately, the uselessness factor got transferred onto one of the new weapons, and how fitting that an annoying Robot Master would give you an annoying weapon to use. The Oil Slider fires similarly to the Water Balloon, with even worse damage output from the Oil Shot. And even more, instead of being able to shoot as many as you can handle at a time, you can only fire one. That's because it stays on the ground when it lands. So, what are you supposed to do with this? Well, you step on it, and then you start sliding around on it. From that point on, you are the weapon. Getting some serious Kinect vibes from this. True, you can slide over water and essentially have a double jump by dismounting in midair, but there are a few serious drawbacks. First, you're always going forward and can't change direction while sliding. The second is that you can only damage an enemy while jumping. Yeah, just try to damage a boss with this thing. The third and most serious problem with the Oil Slider, however, is that you run the risk of damaging yourself if you fail to destroy your enemy in one hit. What good is a weapon that can get you hurt? We really need to get off of fossil fuels. And now we come to Mega Man 3. Like I've brought up, most of the weapons in the game are your standard issue Rudy Tooty Jump and Shooty, with the differences being form and damage. When it comes to which weapon in this game is the worst, most people point to the sole exception, the top spin. And I can see where they're coming from. Aside from looking silly, it's extremely awkward to handle and requires a certain degree of finesse to be good at killing enemies with it.
But at least it's better than a weapon that can't kill enemies to begin with.
The Spark Shock is one of the worst electric weapons in the whole series. You'd think a simple electric ball will be able to shock enemies to death. Unfortunately, this weapon is this high for a reason. When it hits an enemy, it simply creates an electrical field which traps the enemy. Sounds great, right? I mean, the Eye Slasher from the original does effectively the same thing, so you can go to 10 on your frozen foe. But here's the difference. You can't wail on a shocked enemy. Your weapon is stuck on Spark Shock while the field is active. And you can only have 2 of these fields on the screen at any given time. And what's more, a field can only hold one enemy at a time, meaning if a trapped enemy is bumped into by another enemy, the latter enemy takes the trapped enemy's place. The only 2 things keeping this weapon from getting higher is first, it kills a few of the bosses in the game, and second, the Game Boy version allows you to switch weapons. But still, the real shock here is how Capcom took a good weapon and made a worse version of it. I still really don't like all the hate that SheepNDane got when he was revealed for Mega Man 10. I like his design, his stage is cool in motif, he has a fun fight, and he's a reference to classic science fiction literature. He's honestly one of my favorite Robot Masters in the series. However, the hate for his weapon is 100% justified. The Thunderwool is terrible to the point that it makes the Spark Shock look effective. Basically, you shoot a cloud, it rises up, and once it hits the ceiling, a bolt of lightning shoots straight down. That's it. There are several problems with this. First of all, for as long as it takes for the lightning to go off, it barely lasts 2 whole seconds. As such, it's only really useful on stationary enemies or enemies that have been previously frozen, but you could defeat them more easily with other weapons to begin with. Not to mention that its horizontal range is pathetic. It only floats ahead about the width of 2 sprites, meaning it's even more awkward to use effectively. But the real kicker here is that if an enemy hits the cloud disappears, causing minimal damage and rendering your shot essentially wasted. And wasting a shot is exactly the opposite of what you can afford here, since you only get 7 or so shots out of this weapon. It's only really useful against Pumpman, but in nearly every other case, you're better off using one of your other tools. And you know it's sad when the actual Cloudman gives you a weapon that isn't a cloud and is actually worth a damn. The Thunderwool, on the other hand, is just Big Pika-Chungus. Now it's time to bring up a common point of contention in the Mega Man franchise: shield weapons. Most of the games in the series have one, and they're really hit or miss in terms of how good they are. Some work well in certain situations, such as how the Leaf Shield helps out when dealing with the moving platforms in Crashman stage. You have amazing ones like the Junk Shield and the Jewel Satellite, and then there are a few that are simply atrocious. This was a close call to decide between the Plant Barrier and the Skull Barrier. However, the Plant Barrier has one slight advantage, in that it's actually really effective against shielded enemies. Therefore, the Skull Barrier has no defense against its inclusion on my hit list. Like the Plant Barrier, the Skull Barrier goes down after a single hit. Be it a weak enemy, or a projectile of any kind, if it so much as grazes your shield, it crumbles to dust. That goes for shielded enemies as well, which is the one advantage that the Plant Barrier has here. Also, unlike many shields, it can't be thrown in any way. Once you put it up, you have to keep it up until it gets hit. Granted, there are so few situations where you could actually use it, such as when the spinners pop out of the pits, or more prominently as Dive Man's weakness. Even then, it's tricky to use as a weakness weapon, since you have to get up close and personal because, once again, you can't throw the damn thing. If more thought had been put into this weapon, it could actually be as hardcore as its design. But as it stands, it's little more than a fashion accessory that you get from Hot Topic.
Gather round, salty fellows, as it's time for me to once again reiterate how much I hate Quint. So Dr. Wily finds a time machine, finds and reprograms Mega Man from the future, and the best he can do with this idea is a bootleg on a pogo stick.
That is bullshit blazing, still my heart is blazing.
Yeah, I hate his design, I hate his fight, I hate his repetitive high-pitched theme, and I despise the weapon he gives you. The game barely even refers to it as a weapon. It instead calls it Quint Item Sakugan. Yeah, your 11th hour power-up, and it's a pogo stick. The concept is simple. You jump on it, and you have a continuous jump, and you can press the jump button for a higher jump, which damages enemies you land on. If this was implemented properly, this tool could be actually rather useful, but in practice, it is absolutely horrible. First off, it's an energy hog. With a full tank, you only get 11 seconds out of this thing. That's barely enough time to do anything useful with it. Second, the fact that you only have it for the final stage, and third, and the big thing that makes this thing such a bad weapon, is that you have no invulnerability whatsoever while riding it, and this is especially notable because this is supposed to be Wily's weakness. Other games have done the pogo stick idea better. Hell, Capcom themselves did this better 2 years prior. Developer Biox had no excuse to screw it up this bad. No wonder Capcom ditched these guys and went back to Minakuchi Engineering for the rest of the Game Boy games. Before we move on, here are some dishonorable mentions. The Atomic Fire from Mega Man 2, the Top Spin from Mega Man 3, the Charge Kick from Mega Man 5, the Scorch Wheel from Mega Man 7, and the Plug Ball from Mega Man 9. This number 1 was another close call between two weapons that are functionally identical in their native games. So when determining which weapon received my mercy, I had to turn to other games to see if other advantages came up. And in order to even make Gutsman's super arm work in Power Fighters, it was changed to spawn a boulder for Mega Man to throw. Ergo, Erzatz Capcom, you all can take the Deep Digger from Mega Man 5 on Game Boy and stick it straight up your anus! Honestly, how could anyone at Capcom or Minakuchi Engineering have thought that reprising the super arm was a good idea, let alone make it even worse? Its only function is to grab specific rocks and either hurl them at enemies or at the walls to make them shatter backwards. Already you see the first issue with this. Mainly, there are only specific areas where it can even be used. Those areas being where said blocks are present, usually cutting off access to certain items or paths. And in most cases, items can be grabbed with a Mega Arm upgrade. And even when you find these blocks, there are almost never enemies to use the blocks on, so you rarely even get a chance to use it as a weapon to begin with. The only 4 places where you'll really be able to use this is to get the gems from Pluto and Jupiter stages, the fight against Terra, and maybe some hidden rooms in the Wily Star, and literally nowhere else. If you're gonna make a weapon to access hidden rooms, at least make the weapon useful in actual combat. Oh wait! They already did that in the same game with Pluto's Break Dash, a weapon that breaks other blocks that are blocking hidden rooms, and can be used to attack enemies anywhere you need it, making the Deep Digger even more redundant.
And it especially sucks because most of the weapons in Mega Man 5 on Game Boy are actually really good. You have the tracking Spark Chaser, the Electric Shock, which is a good close-range weapon, and even the Grab Buster, which lets you refill your health. So for a weapon as useless as the Deep Digger to exist in the same game is just a waste. I guess some people never learn. I'm the Quarter Guy, and until next time, the arcade is closed.
So Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, the most successful fighting game in history, is almost a year old. It's amazing how this series has grown from a little experiment, to a celebration of Nintendo, to a celebration of gaming with nearly 80 characters. And yet we might not have any of these characters were it not for our plumber, a gorilla, a lady, and a giant building. Funny how things work out, huh? Next time, QG at the arcade! Donkey Kong! It's game time!